Hello, Ryan.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm sitting in my house
Yep. I think we
because,
almost all are, right?
yeah, because it's like the coolest hurricane. I think this is the most snow I've seen since I don't remember when. Um,
Yeah, it's intense, and the for me the biggest thing to look when you look out as we all have over the last few days is just think there wasn't a flake on the ground a few like a day ago or two
like a
days
week
ago.
ago, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
looking out my window up on the second, which overlooks the second floor porch, and basically the snow is almost up to the top of the window.
yeah.
It's crazy.
It's intense. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the 507 podcast, and we're looking at Welcome to the Belfry Ranch. I'm hoping you're seeing
Yes.
that on your screen. And we're going to
Yep.
walk through a couple of the projects that we found particularly interesting from the electronics module,
Yes.
and then take from our discussion, we're hoping that everyone else who watches this podcast will take as an example of what they could do as well. So rather than say, oh, you should do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, we're going to say this is what two people did really nicely.
Yeah.
And
Provide some inspiration.
yeah, so again, just to reiterate, the structure of the class walks us through the history of information technology. So we did the module 2, which was pre-telegraphy. I'm not going to remember the modules now. This is module 3, which was
Electronics. Yeah. Which
so
included both telegraphy as well as
telegraphy,
broadcasting.
telephony, radio, and TV effectively. Okay,
Yep.
huge
Yep.
thing. But overall, the question is always, how can we use uses and gratifications theory to explain how people shaped telegraphy, telephony, broadcasting, or radio over that, pick one of those topics. How can we use that theory to explain how people use these technologies to shape their lives? Or alternatively, how can we use affordance theory to explain how the natures of the technology or the characteristics of telephony, telegraphy, broadcasting, or radio had an impact. The characteristics of the technology had an impact on how people used it. So these two projects that we're going to highlight did this really well, and
Yes.
some of the other ones didn't. And so that's really the key. You just got to do that, because otherwise what you're doing is, if the students are, if you're just not just, but if you're saying, here's what I know about the technology, here's what happened, that would be great in a history of technology class, but that's not what this is.
Right, exactly,
So,
and it's something that obviously we've made a point of emphasis previously, but are we going to even put even more sort of pressure on that going forward? We'll just say it that way.
yeah, and we'll get there. So this Belfry Ranch is
Yeah.
cool. And so what I love about this project is that it takes the idea of focusing in this case, affordance theory, very seriously.
Yes.
And you can kind of walk through this project and get these little hits, these little theory buttons, if you will.
Yeah.
And what I really love is that and then it does a really beautiful job in design. So it imagines, how can I use a hypertextual design in this case to convey that message?
Right.
And that's great. This isn't long, because it doesn't have to be long. It's not by long, what I mean is, there's not, if I counted up the words here, it wouldn't be very many words, but it was long in terms of design, long in terms of effort, long in terms of putting it together. So it's not the words, it's just really it really focused in a small way and made it a full project. So this was great. And besides
Yeah.
the fact that it's so cool because it's talking about barbed wire.
Yeah. And what I love about the theory, the integration of the theory, is that it isn't just tacked on at the end, which tends to sometimes happen when you're not really sure how to connect to the theory deeply. Is let's sort of get to the last slide that says, oh, by the way, affordances, uses,
Right.
grats, that kind of thing. So it's integrated throughout and from the start, and B, that doesn't take away from the design. That's used to enhance the design. So that's really cool. Is to think about not only integrating theory, but thinking about how that theory could inform and enhance the ability to create this beautifully looking, wonderfully designed project.
Yeah. So a second one that we'll focus on is this Aprezi, and I think, by the way, we should give credit. This is Justin.
That's Justin. Yes, Justin.
And so, yeah, not only should we give credit, but you can go find it. This is Justin Cushing, I think.
Yes,
And I'm going to type his name here. So then it will show up on the screen. So if you want to follow through and look at his project, you can go through the discussion group and find it. And the second one, I think this is Brianna Moyers.
Mm-hmm.
I should have looked that up. I'm pretty positive this is Brianna Moyers.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure too. I can double check here.
Yeah. But, and so you'll find her. And this is Aprezi. And what Brianna, and I'm going to walk through some of these. So what Brianna's Aprezi does is focuses in on presidents who, as she frames it, mobilized public opinion with radio. And so far we don't have a clue about, is this uses and grats or affordances? But then we get this model, which is ambitious, and I would interpret to suggest that in the between the braces there, presidents use radio to inform the public, which frames public's opinion. And somehow that public opinion goes back and influences the president. And I think that this graphic suggests to me that there's a sort of an output that she's going to explain that circle using uses and grats and explain that circle using affordance theory.
Yeah.
That's a great setup.
Absolutely.
And so that's a really nice, and I love the way that it's right there. And I might have some quibbles about how it actually works, and her performance, but overall, I think this is pretty good. So I like this notion, the affordance of radio technology. I would have suggested what she really means is the affordance of radio broadcasting, because it's the affordances of the radio broadcasting. In the next frame, we'll get to the affordance of the actual radio.
Right, exactly, because those are two different things.
And so here she says that, it makes information accessible in ways not possible beforehand, allowed them to form an opinion about wars, blah, blah. So there I want to say, well, how and why? Like, what was it about radio that allows them to form an opinion? And you'd have to differentiate to really nail this down. You'd have to differentiate between radio and previous technologies. Like, what was it about radio? And I think you could then say, well, it's hearing the actual voice. And she hints at it. Hearing the voice is more convincing than reading about what he said. And so this is fun because here she does affordance theory of the radio itself.
Right, which is really an interesting sort of, like we said, a split between this concept of broadcasting, which is what we focused on, what a lot of the readings focused on. But here it's focused on the actual unit itself, which becomes really important. In later, we talk about this a lot today with today's technology, but maybe wasn't necessarily something people were focused on as much with the radio, which is really cool.
And this is like right out of the David Levy kind of approach.
Yeah.
And so the one quibble that I'd have is quite literally a person, young or old, regardless of race and class, can turn a knob, blah, blah, blah. Well, she's almost got it right there. It's quite literally a person, young or old, who cannot read. Can turn a knob. It's not so much, I think it's implied in race and class, perhaps, that in the mid-1900s, there were certain races and certain classes that were not literate, but would have nailed it if she said you didn't have to be literate to listen to the radio.
Right, because that also differentiates that from a newspaper, which in theory could be similarly accessible and brought into the home, but yet is very different in terms of its mode of delivery of the communication.
Yeah, but I really do like the way that here she just walks us through the theory, uses and grats. People use the radio to gain insight. But what was it about radio that was so special? Mm-hmm. And she hints at it with actually hearing the voice and the message speaking real time. But she said they actively chose because of its personal connection, and just I think another half a phrase would have completely nailed it and made it really clear. Like, what is how is it that hearing a voice creates that personal connection? So that's all the things I would have added to this. This last frame, by the way, confused me a little bit because I wasn't quite sure where we were. But I guess in summary, and I'm going to go back to the Belfry Ranch just for a visual here. But in summary, I would encourage the next round of projects to really focus in on one of those two theories. And perhaps we've been a little liberal in encouraging students to go off into other theories. But I think that as we move forward, I'd really like to see, and we'll talk about this in our next podcast, which we're going to do in a second, but I'd really like to see people focus in on one of those theories and just focusing on that.
A back to basics module to make sure that we're really hammering home what we're doing.
And one of the things, by the way, I believe it was in this project, I believe it was, that pretty sure it was this one that really drove the project home was the memo.
Yes.
And the memo, sometimes the memos have a lot more detail in them than other times, but if you put that stuff in the memo, that saves this project. And and not getting into grading, but that's really what contributed to the quality of this project was the quality of the memo. So
right, because I think oftentimes students are concerned that when they're designing that they can't fit, quote unquote, they don't want to shoehorn stuff in, and the memo can point to a depth of complexity that maybe you're worried isn't there. So if you're worried something isn't showing through in your project, put it in the memo.
Right. So that's our quick review. I am so close to being done all the grades. By the time you get this podcast loaded, the grading will be done. And I know, Ryan, your grades are done because you're more efficient than I am.
Well, it's more just a product of having to do it at night because during the day when the daycare closed because of the snow, I'm just chasing a toddler during the day.
Chasing the toddler. We'll conclude with a really quick reflection on what I thought was one of the best videos ever. Do I still have it up? Oh, I don't have it up.
Oh yes, the two children running in on the professor. That's
what was it? The BBC interview kid. And I know this is way off the topic, but the Telegraph. This thing was one of the best pieces I think I've seen in years, so I just had to share it.
If you're into thinking about granular analysis of any kind of media, this is right up your alley. Like taking something shot for shot and element for element of how it actually breaks down. It's really great. It's funny. It's informative. Yeah.
Scandals happen all the time.
So there we go. Okay, so we're going to get to the next one.
Okay.
For,
take care.
For the wider region,
Bye-bye.
you want to go children.